Around this around this season, they come by. I ask them a lot of questions, and there's usually anywhere from 3 to 12 of these what we call road scholars. And usually I start to wonder to myself, is it really worth going back and asking them questions about what the meaning of Christmas is? But by the end of the week, they've always given me some new and some fresh insights. And maybe that's why these guys are called the wise men. And it talks about, the only place it talks about these guys is in Matthew chapter 2. So I'd like to look at Matthew chapter 2 this morning. And I believe that we will find something about how it is that we can connect with God. We can get in step with Him as we look at the story of the wise men. So it begins in Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. And so as we begin this story, there's going to be some very important things that we're going to pick up from these wise men. But the first thing maybe we should clarify a few things, get the story straight a little bit, because it's always there's always a few things that people think about these wise men, and they're called wise men, but in reality they're called magi, and they are not kings. Some people might think they're kings because magi is kind of like your majesty. Sometimes you think that sounds the same, but actually, what other word does magi sound like? Yeah, magic, magician. Actually, these were people that generally were high up in government, and they were advisors to kings, advisors to governments. A lot of times they studied a lot of things, including the stars and the universe, and they collected wisdom, and they tried to find out as much as they could. And so these were the guys that is referred to here. And, okay. And it says that in the days of Herod the king, behold, the wise men came from the east to Jerusalem. And so a lot of times we also picture the wise men there in the manger scene, right? And you can see why, because they look good there if you have those three pieces to put in there. But in reality, they came after the birth of Christ. They saw the star, and they came and they traveled from afar. And they came to Jesus and saw Jesus when he was a young child. And we think of three of them a lot of times because of the fact that there was gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Three gifts, but in reality there's probably a lot more than three of them. There might have been some traditions say 12, but there could have been a lot more than that because they came as a group, and they got attention of everybody in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem was a big bustling city, so there probably was a crowd of them. And it says, saying, where is he who is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. They were in the east, they saw this star, right? And they looked up and they said to each other, or maybe one of them saw the star and he said to the rest of them, there's a new star up there. What is the deal with this star? Or all of a sudden it got bright. What does this mean? And being people that studied the stars, they knew that it had to mean something. And so it could have been that they were in some way familiar with the Jewish people. If they were from Babylon, which is likely, remember Daniel was one of the advisors, him and his guys, as well as other people were wise men that consulted with the king. And remember that there was a Jewish influence there, and they probably studied the scriptures, and they may even have came across Numbers chapter 24, verse 17, which says this: I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star come out of Jacob. A scepter shall rise out of Israel. And so they may have been seeing this verse and say, this was a prophecy of something in the future to come. I see him, but it's not now. I see him, but it's far away. And they said, it's a star. And they said, what else did they say it was? A scepter. What does a scepter go with? A king, right. So here is a star that's a sign, and a scepter means a king is going to come out of Judah. And so they realized this star is God's way of saying something. God's way of indicating something that the Messiah, that the coming king was born. And we need to take notice of that. And so they got going to have to probably, I'm speculating a little bit, but they got there somehow, probably from Babylon or somewhere around there, which is about 900 miles away, by the way. They got together and they said, well, we've got to go and see this king. And they probably got together their camels and their assistants, and they, of course, they had some valuable commodities with them, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and they went on this journey, and they traveled this long distance. And I can just, Daniel and his buddies were young guys, right? They were young men. So I'm thinking these guys, even though they're wise, they're young. And I can just picture this group of guys saying, hey, you want to go on this? Yeah, let's go on. And so they all, because have you ever done that when you were younger? You can decide to go somewhere. Just bam. I've done that a few times. One time my girlfriend, I don't know if Janice I ever told you this, but my girlfriend at the time was 450 miles away. And I just decided I'm just going to go see her, right? Bam. Right? But I didn't have a group with me, right? And I had a car. So anyway, these guys decided we're going on this trip. They got on their camels and they took off, headed for Jerusalem to see what is this? What is this? And here's the thing I want you to notice. There's things that happen in our lives, and we might not, we might just think, oh, that's just something, instead of, this was something that might mean something. Maybe God's trying to do something. Maybe God's trying to tell me something. Now, let me ask you this. If a new star appeared in the sky, and it lasted for one day, for 24 hours, that star was in the sky, how many people on the earth would have the possibility of seeing that star? All of them. It's there the whole time. They don't need satellite, right? God didn't need satellite. One great big bulletin board called the sky. He puts a star in there. Everybody could have seen it. There's nobody that could have seen it. They couldn't have seen it, unless you're blind, and then somebody could have told you about it. But only these guys, at least only these guys saw it and reacted to it. And so the first thing I want you to know is when you think God might be doing something's happening in your life, it might seem good, it might seem bad, ask yourself, what can I do to further pursue this? What is God doing here? And so the first thing I noticed is they took action. They got on their camels and they traveled that 900 miles to get there to Jerusalem. And it said that we've come from the east to worship him. They knew that this was significant. This wasn't just anybody. This was, dare I say it, this was God, or somebody that they believed worthy of worship, and somebody that the Jewish people followed. And so there they arrived and they said, we've come to worship him. And when Herod the king, now you notice it says, in the days of Herod the king, and then it says, in the next verse, saying, where is he who was born? King of the Jews. And now it goes back to Herod the king. And so, let me ask you this. How many kings can you have? One king. How does it work if you have two kings? It's not good to have two kings. That's also true in your life. You can only have one king. Sometimes we try to have multiple kings, but you can only have one king. And so here was something that Matthew was trying to set up to help us see. Here's a king. He's known as King of the Jews. His name is Herod. He really wasn't. He was partially Jewish. And this guy, Herod, was not really a good man. He did something good. He helped build the temple. He got that going. But he was also a guy that had 9 wives, and he killed one of his wives. How would you like to have that as your leader, someone who killed one of their wives? Oh, he also killed 2 of his sons. 2 of his sons, and he also killed one of his wife's brothers. That's Herod, right? And he did that because he was nervous. He was nervous that because you know what they say about uneasy rests the crown? When you're king, even though he wasn't like he wasn't like the Roman emperor, but he was the king of this area. You don't want anybody to take your place, and so he was very scared about. He was worried about that. So it says, when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. He said, "What? There's another king. This bothers me." And if you're in Jerusalem and you have a king that tends to kill people when he gets troubled, how would you be feeling? troubled also. He was troubled, and all Jerusalem with. Don't mess with the king. Don't make the king nervous here. And when he had gathered the chief priests and the scribes, before we move on to that, you know what these guys did when they got to Jerusalem? Did they just go about a secret search? Did the wise men go? No, they started asking people. What do you think they expected? The star was there. They probably expect everybody. They know where he's. This has been 4 or 5 months, maybe longer, since Jesus was born. Probably everybody knew, but they didn't. But what they did was they interacted. Not only did they act, but now they interacted. You know, when you feel like God's doing something, and maybe he's calling you to something, like the wise men, don't just do it by yourself, right? Get some other people. Get some people and say, hey, maybe God wants us to do something, because God works in groups. That's why he calls us a church, right? Church means called together, a group that's called together. And so they started calling, okay, here's God's people. They're going to want to be in on this, but they didn't want to be on this. So they tried to interact, but nobody wanted it. So here's what happened. When he heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and the scribes of the people together, he inquired of them, where was the Christ to be born? So they said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for it is written by the prophet, but you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who shall be the shepherd, who shall shepherd my people of Israel. And so he wanted the answer, where? Bethlehem. And so he finds out Bethlehem, and this was prophesied. This is something that was prophesied, and then it happened. Do you think anything has been prophesied in our day? Think God's prophesied some things? Do we always know what they are? No, sometimes we have to look back to see what happened. But right here, Matthew was trying to tell us this event was prophesied, that Jesus would come and be born in Bethlehem. And as we go through this chapter, there's a whole bunch of events. It's as though God had set it up perfectly for Jesus to be born at this time. As a matter of fact, the whole world was ruled by the Romans. So you could travel from one place to the next easier. They had Roman roads. And all of the things were coming together that had been prophesied in the Old Testament. This was just an example of a couple of them. The star, and then Bethlehem. Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, so he said, wise men, come here, I got to talk to you. Don't worry about those guys. I need to ask you something. It's very important. And so he said, when he had secretly called the wise men, he determined from them what time the star appeared. Why do you think he wanted to know what time the star appeared? Yeah. You know, later on we're going to find out that he had a certain time period that he was operating on. But yeah, he says, I want to know where, I want to know who, I want to know what. Just very interested in what was happening here. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go search carefully for the young child, and when you have found him, bring back word to me, that I may come and worship him also. And so he's got something going on in his mind. We know what it is. The wise men don't know, though. They think, oh, this is on the up and up. The king actually wants to come and worship him. And when they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them, till it came and stood over the young child. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. Saw this star, who knows how much earlier? Maybe 2 months, maybe 4 months, maybe even a year or two earlier. They saw this star, and because of that, they knew that they had to go to Jerusalem. Why do you think when they were going to Israel, they wanted to go to Jerusalem? It's the capital. Yeah, let's go to the capital. They ought to know what's going on with their own king, right? They get there, and they haven't seen the star, and all of a sudden this star appears again. If you start, if you say, God, I think you're doing something, you start acting, you go into action, and you start getting a group to interact with. A lot of times God shows you the next step, but it's not until you go into action that you get the next step, and all of a sudden there's the star again. We've been waiting for that thing, and so they headed 8 or 9 miles. How far was it? 6 miles. To Bethlehem. And it says,
The star went before them, and they rejoiced exceedingly great joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with his mother Mary, and fell down and worshipped him. And they opened their treasures and presented them to him, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. In this one chapter, 9 times it says the young child. 9 times it says the young child. It doesn't say baby, it says young child. What do you think of when you think of a young child? Toddler, okay. What else do you think of? What kind of emotions does it evoke? What? Okay, yeah. Somebody said fear? Okay. Yeah, especially the electrical outlets. Anything else? Joy, fun, precious. You know what else? Defenseless, innocent, vulnerable. You got to have those child latch doors when you got a young child, right? Especially if you live near a busy street. So here it talks about Jesus, it's talking about Jesus as a young child. These wise men come and they see this cute little baby, right? This young child. But the thing they're realizing is God brought us here to see, what did he do? God somehow came down as a little baby. God did that for us. He gave us a sign for us. He did that. He put his son in a vulnerable spot like that for us. They couldn't help from do right then is worship. They had to fall down on their knees. They had to worship because of what God had done for them. They had to react. They acted. They interacted. But now they reacted. You know, when you're around Christmas, if you're thinking about Jesus at all, you've got to react. You've got to worship. You've got to say, wait a minute, you did this for me? You did this for me? And so they reacted. It says in verse 12, and this is really the last time we see the wise men. Some ripples keep on throughout the rest of the chapter. But here it says, then being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed for their own country in another way. So now God actually speaks to them. God warns them in a dream that things were not right, that there was an enemy out there, that Satan is alive and well, and he wants to do harm to this innocent, vulnerable baby. And he said, I want you to go back a different way. And they said, okay, we're listening to God now, but when you decide to follow God, is it always easy? If you decide to do what God wants you to do, does he pave the way all the way? Well, in one way he does, but in another way, you know what? It's a battle because Satan is out there. And so sometimes you have to counteract. You have to pray against Satan. You have to change your direction. You have to be ready. You have to be ready to follow God's leading. It may be working fine to do one thing and keep on doing that, but at some point if God says do a different thing, right? You need to be ready to counteract. And so that's what they did. They went a different way. And then it goes on to say, and this is kind of the continuing ripples of what they did. In verse 13, now when they departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. An angel appeared last week. And now again, Joseph is, whenever he talks to angels, they show up in his dreams. He's interacting with them. Saying, arise, take the young child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and stay there until I bring you word, for Pharaoh will seek the young child to destroy him. When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt. And so what happened was the wise men didn't go back where they were supposed to go, right? And so now God is warning Joseph that, hey, because of that, some other ripple effects are going to happen. So you need to go away. You need to get out of town. Fortunately, God had provided them with what kind of finances? Gold, frankincense, and myrrh, some valuable things. Here's a parting gift as you get out of Israel. So they headed out of Israel to Egypt, and it says that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, out of Egypt I've called my son. So wait a minute. So these wise men, they listened to God, they counteracted by going a different way, and now that caused this prophecy to be fulfilled. God made all these prophecies to let people know, you know what? This is my son. I am sending the Messiah. And he said, and he was ticking them off one at a time. Born in Bethlehem, born of a virgin. Now, my son will be called out of Egypt. Then Herod, when he saw that he'd been deceived by the wise men, was exceedingly angry. And he sent forth and to put to death all the male children who were in Bethlehem and in all its districts from 2 years old and under. That's why some people think that it may be even 2 years. It probably wasn't that long, but maybe he just wanted to be safe. So he said, I want everybody, all children, males, to be put to death that are 2 years and under, according to the time which was determined by the wise men. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, a voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation, weeping, and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted, because they are no more. The interesting thing was, tragedies still happen, right? And this was serious. There was probably, they're guessing maybe 20 babies that age, male, because it was just a small town. But it was a huge loss, obviously, for those families. But it was also a fulfillment of what God knew was going to happen. The ripple continues. The ripple continues, and it says, now when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, arise, take the young child and his mother, and go to the land, for those who sought the young child's life are dead. Then he arose and took the child and his mother and came to the land of Israel. So what happens now is he goes to Egypt. Now he goes, and now what the wise men did now continues to ripple to the next thing. They go back to Israel. But Joseph, when he had heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea instead of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there, and being warned by God in another dream, he turned aside and went to the region of Galilee and came and dwelt to the city of Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled, again, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. And so what we find out is this: these wise men, when they saw God, when something was unusual, they looked and said, God, what's going on here? And they took action. And then when they felt God, when they knew that God was leading them, they interacted with they got other people to say, let's follow God. And then they reacted. They worshiped him. And now there's a chain reaction that keeps on going, and they can see the effects just moving on out from the fulfillment of one scripture to another, to another, to another. And so as we move on from these wise men, the thing I want us to take with us, really, especially this season, is when you see God doing something, get on board with it. It sometimes means you have to change everything you're doing. You have to stop doing one thing and do another thing. Tell other people about it. Be ready for opposition. And then, most of all, just worship. Worship God. React to what God is doing with praise, with honor, with worship. And then continue to pray as God allows those ripples, that chain reaction to happen, because you know what? That's why we're here today. Because it didn't stop then. It just kept on going. Let's close in prayer.